Forward. Well, good afternoon and good evening. Soroptimist sisters everywhere. It's been quite an honour to be able to represent you in CSW in New York this year and in Bangkok. But before we go into the detail, I'd like to acknowledge the Indigenous people of the land I'm on today, and it's called the Cubby Cubby land. I'm up in University of the Sunshine Coast, which is about 2-hour drive from Brisbane, and or from where I live, and it's been quite interesting. I would like to acknowledge also the Indigenous people. It's a very important year this year in Australia, but around the world, because of the UN Indigenous Peoples Expert Panel, and in Australia, the Voice. And I'd like to sing and play an anthem that was given to us by the Indigenous women of Southeast Queensland. And I'm not going to sing it in Yuccan Bay language. I'm going to sing it in English so we can understand. So, just a moment. Just a moment. We have to have clapsticks at the beginning. Oh, come on.
Look up the land, she is the mother. Honor each person, a sister. And rain will come to come. Then rain will
That's really explains some attitudes and some things we need to consider in having a common future together. Even their attitude towards the flood. Their flood means that the land is being renewed. We look at a flood and we think disaster. So that's a real interesting difference. So I should get into this because we have a limited time, I understand. So it was an absolute privilege to be part of Soroptimists and represent Soroptimists this year in New York after such a big break. We haven't met there since 2019. But first of all, I'd like to introduce our program panel, our program team. I think you know all these people, but just in case you don't, Cesarina is our Assistant Program Director 1. Sarada is for 2 other zones. She looks after advocacy they look after advocacy and projects. But more than that, they are an absolute wealth of support and information and integrity when it comes to our reporting and making sure the information that we give to the UN is actually available and viable and feasible and sensible and not and definitely reliable. Really important. I'd like to introduce too Ian Allen, who's on this call tonight. She looks after Zone 1, Norraini Yazin, who's not with us tonight. She's not been well. Pauline Glover is here. Thank you, Pauline, and Rhonda McCormack. So they're from New South Wales, from Brisbane Water, but not Brisbane Water, and they are just a gem. Now, we do have certain roles, of course. One of them is to make sure that we connect policy with our practice, but also connect our practice with international policy. So that's the most succinct way I can explain. And of course, Lee Elwood Brown, who's on this call tonight, will attest to quite a bit of that. We have a work plan, of course, which includes our traditional 4 UN days. But with Maureen Maguire, we've got 2 extra days that we also celebrate. Maybe more, but anyway, they are you probably know these really, really well. International Women's Day, which includes the CSW theme of the year in March. We have a whole month of June we dedicate to environment and the themes within environment. We have the day, International Day of the Girl Child, which is October, and then the 16 days of Orange the World, 16 days of respect, which goes from the International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women to Human Rights Day. However, we do other special things, and we are asked to do this because we're part of a bigger family, the 5 federations together, and we educate, empower and enable. So the education is underpinned by the 24th of January when we have Education Day, and I think it's the 9th of September, we do Literacy Day. This is really important to Bettina in the audience tonight, because Bettina's really on about adult literacy and really important. And that's one of the measures we use in Asia Pacific, adult literacy, because if you don't have adult or youth literacy, adult literacy, you don't have a pathway out of poverty necessarily, or there's an equivalent there. So that's one of the indicators that we are risk areas for modern slavery and the sorts of things that we have in our region. Now, what was all CSW about this year? Well, we had a priority theme, which was all about digital technology, but we also had a review theme. The review theme was about rural women, and rural women was the theme for 2019. So every time that CSW meets, it reviews what the last big thing. So that was 4 years ago. A lot has happened, and rural women, the topic for rural women was quite broad. It includes Indigenous women, rural, remote, islander women, isolated women. So really, rural women was more than just what you imagine straight off. But I really wanted to spend our time looking at digital technology. Now, there's, who went? There was 15,700 women or people who attended, either virtually and in person. Only about 7,000 people were in person in New York, and the way that we structure New York is that you have the General Assembly, you have parallel events, you have side events, and you have a range of other things that are organised to support and allow and teach people how to advocate for positive change. So Christine Johnson, Lee Elwood Brown, Judy Toll, who's on the call tonight from West Australia, and myself, we were the 4 Soroptimists from Australia. We did get a 5th Soroptimist from our federation. Thank you. The 5th Soroptimist from our federation couldn't get her visa in time, and she was from Cambodia. It was such a shame, because it would have been wonderful for her to have that wonderful experience. Now, when we get to that big lot of women in the middle there, are 67 Australians who met there. And why am I saying Australians and focusing on that? Well, today we have mainly Australians in the audience, and this tells us how important gender equality and feminist policy is for us in Australia, when 67 women, all ages, as you can see there, all backgrounds. We've got migrant women, Indigenous women. We had June Oscar. We had the commissioners, e-safety commissioner. We were the first, one of the first countries to have an e-safety commissioner, which is all about electronic technology. We had Kate Jenkins before she stood down. So she was the Women at Work Commissioner. Oh, she had a better title than that, but we're keeping in touch with her as well. We have the brand new ambassador for women and girls, who is Stephanie Page, I think her name is, but definitely Stephanie. She's agreed to be part of our conference next year as well. So Some of the older women there have been coming for many, many years, and you could probably, but what it meant is 67 women met over the course. Every afternoon at 5 p.m. we would meet, Australians would meet, not the same ones, of course, because we all had different sorts of commitments, but we met and debriefed and briefed each other on what we should be doing tomorrow, what we should advocate, and what our caucus should be doing later on. So this year too, it was very special because we got invited to a town hall. So the NGOs met with this right down in the General Assembly. The NGOs, the women, mainly women, some of them were LGBTIQ, who come under our banner of as gender equality, came and sat with the Secretary General and the second in charge and the new commissioner, the new executive director for UN Women, and answered every question that people raised from the audience and answered them properly and put us on notice for special things to look out for in May and June this year. So the other photos that I have here is we have UN reps. So up in the top right-hand corner, we have Stacey Clack and we have Bertha Bertha Von, wonderful woman who lives in Vienna. And Bertha is into law and international law, and Stacey is our STEM and technology expert, but she's our UN rep who speaks in New York. So we have several of these UN reps. Not very many turned up, which disappointed me. But down on the bottom corner on the right-hand side, we have the women, the Soroptimists. I just can't see them because of where my cameras are. Just a moment, here we are. We have women from across, Soroptimist women, all lined up at the General Assembly. Some of these are our UN reps, and we have them from South America. The next lady was from Cameroon, the West SIGB, I think she's head of program. No, she's not the head of program. She's the SIGB president or president-elect. We have Bertha, we have Stacey, who I just introduced, wonderful woman from Rome beside her, and I can't remember her name. And Alice is the young youth one with the ginger hair on the far side, and I can't quite remember the lady with the blue jacket. She might be the one from Alaska. Yes. Okay, on that note, I wanted to personalise, because it's very easy to get stuck into the detail, which are very easy for me to do, but the personalities and the friendships and the connections that we make are the difference, why we actually go in person to these things. We miss out so much when we're online, but it's quite expensive to go to, and most people fund themselves to go to New York. So our priority theme was really important. There were quite a few positives came out of it and quite a few concerns. The 3 E's, of course, are the 3 E's we talk about: education. The third one is elimination of violence, education, entrepreneurship, I think. And then we looked at the e-commerce and how we can have women from any remote area, so long as they've got a mobile phone, being able to do business either globally or locally, and without the issues that you know, someone runs away with the money, someone does this, there's no, you know, but the bank doesn't open, there's no bank accounts, whatever. The big issue that we really dealt with as a positive was disaster recovery, digital democracy for disasters, and I'll talk about that shortly. What opportunities there are for youth when we do have decent digital technology, and we're careful about the negatives that come out of that. Also peace, we were able to lobby peace. And you say, what's that got to do with anything? Well, when Ukraine and Russia were having difficulties and still having difficulties, the ability for digital and communications and technology to help our decision making or help the communication lost souls and, keeping in touch with family gets cut off. And when there's conflict, we also find this in Afghanistan, of course, and everywhere, Syria. Anytime there's conflict, China. I don't have to tell Patricia Johnson about that, do I? But when we're dealing with peace and not fake news, having honest communications, even Facebook, when there's an issue or a conflict or disaster, having Facebook availability and families being able to contact each other and let them know that they're okay. Really important positives if we can do that. And of course, and Chris Knight knows all about the concerns that we have with cybersecurity. And yes, there's many concerns. I felt that we talked more about the concerns than we did about the good bits and the opportunities. However, we do know that because traditionally men have been in the technology space, not young women or girls learning those systems, except for Sue Latter, of course, and Christine Johnson, but who are absolute whizzes. We don't have enough women doing the coding. We don't have enough women looking and auditing the databases that we have saved. Now, the case in point for Queensland and Australia is our crime databases, our Crime and Conduct Commission, some of our things that we really rely on are all the negatives, and they're nearly always malely skewed. Now, the other things are really skewed too, and that includes safety technology. When they make seat belts and when they were making safety equipment, they were making it for men. They didn't make them for children or women or small people or people with disabilities. So the thing is, some of our systems that we really rely on are not necessarily inclusive of what we need for feminists or for design for other people besides the mindset and think that was there. Now, that funny looking TFGBV, which I'm not sure got into the final report, but I'll know tomorrow, is technology facilitated gender-based violence. Now, we've been talking about it, but it's a mouthful. When we open up the can of worms there, of course, we've got stalking, we've got hate, children and high school kids and hate speech and hate emails, hate social media, and horrible things like that comes out of the violence, but also loss of reputation. Now, we wouldn't think that loss of reputation is so important. It is just as hurtful as being physically bashed. Now, the other big thing with technology facilitated gender-based violence is the amount of porn. And we find that even in Malaysia, when I was with Sarada, we were finding that the teenagers were learning about sex and sex education from internet. Now, that isn't always good. In fact, it's quite concerning. And they found a great percentage of boys were learning about that through porn. So that is not the right way to necessarily learn about the sacred act of sex, is it? Or, physical intimacy. It was really quite horrible. And New Zealand has taken a very interesting approach to advertising and advising people about gender-based violence. And that New Zealand has a wicked sense of humour of dealing with really sensitive things, but I shouldn't really dwell on that. What we also found with the technology facilitated is the grooming for modern slavery, but grooming for young women, grooming for vulnerable people, and the great horrible web that causes that. So we did have quite a lot of discussion about the ugly stuff about digital technology. And of course, we know about GPT chat and AI and AI-assisted journalism, artificial intelligence penetrating the university systems now. We don't know what we're assessing, whether it's people's real critical analysis and critical thinking, or whether there's really big issues about AI. However, I see also positives in artificial intelligence, but it has to be managed well. Now, the language that comes out of CSW is really important because it becomes the legal language internationally, and in legislation and in policy. And if we can get that language across all countries, we're able to manage, especially digital technology, which goes across all countries, we're able to address some of our biggest concerns. When we have like modern slavery and following the money, we have to use the same legal systems across the world in international spheres in order for the banking systems and the audit systems to follow the money about who the real perpetrators and who the real beneficiaries of people trafficking and those sorts of things. But what we found in our resolutions that came out this year is that some of the legal jargon was not advanced, and we then have to rely on other UN agencies to use the language that we need. Now, the case in point I'd like to talk about is the WHO has comprehensive sexual education, really important for we Soroptimists. The WHO has had information, language in place, legal language, for a long time. We have found that we have to rely on some of these other agencies to use the language that we need to get the message across, because we're going backwards a little bit in the way that the CSW has been using language in the resolution. So we've got 29 pages of resolutions, and tomorrow we're expecting to get the proper version. I think it's tomorrow lunchtime, our time, and I'll be linking in to find out exactly what came out of that. The negotiation's a bit interesting. When we go into CSW, before we leave our countries to go there or to sit in on sessions if you're online, we have draft resolutions in advance. Now, some of those draft resolutions will be agreed and won't be argued, about 30 of them out of 103. So 30 of them not negotiable. And then we get into the argy-bargy with the rest. So what do I mean by argy-bargy? Well, some countries like Pakistan and Afghanistan and a few countries wouldn't let their women attend CSW. They had men speaking on their behalf and reading letters as if it was written by a woman, and we know damn well it wasn't. And that was one of the prime ministers. But the beauty of when we sat in on the general assemblies and each of the countries were reading out their positions on certain things, we had some really wonderful young women who were, 5 of them, who were prime ministers. So we had Prime Minister for Hungary, Prime Minister for Finland, the other one from Iceland, and some of the things, and Judy Toll was in the audience with me that day, and we were nudging each other all the time because we say, oh, come on. Of course, each of those countries have different issues, but the way that they spoke was just so empowering. And then you get a man reading a letter that's supposed to be written by a woman, and we know that it wasn't written by a woman, it couldn't possibly be written by a woman. However, and that's why it takes so long to get agreed resolutions, because each of the country has to, each of the representatives who speak at these sessions has to go back and take the 29 pages back to their country and see what they can agree. And then we have caucusing. Now, caucusing, when you ever do model UNs, and we want to do some more in Soroptimist so that we can all learn to do this better. And in our day-to-day work too, learning how to caucus properly is really important. The caucusing, which some of you may be much more advanced than I've only been doing it 20 years. But the caucusing is where countries band together on a specific issue. Tomorrow they might not be opposing each other on another paragraph in the resolutions, but today they'll be arguing some silly thing like, comprehensive sex education for teenagers. So I'll just turn this off. Thank you. Now, what are the outcomes? except for very tired people after 15 days of negotiations. They went into the early hours of the Saturday morning, still arguing in their caucusing areas before we got the 29 pages agreed upon. Very tired people. Not all of us went to the whole 15 days of that. Not everybody gets into the caucusing, but we can't really go home until we've got something that to prove that, you know, something came out of it. For us in Australia, I think it just strengthened what we already have. With our 67 women together, we really became much stronger and much friendlier. We work much closely. We understand the roles of independent reviewers like commissioners and ambassadors, our ambassadors, but also a global digital compact. Now, when we were at the town hall and we were talking about the global digital compact, I'll just go on to the next one. Just a minute. There we go. The global digital compact is a terror-free satellite communication system that's owned by the UN. So we're not going to be getting fake news. We're supposed to be protecting from terrorism. We're supposed to trust what happens with this global digital compact and what is involved in it. I've just got to move this just a moment. So there were some really interesting things coming out of it. So this is a bit of a mishmash in front of you. I've talked about a few special areas, but cyber for youth, yes, there's lots of opportunities for young people to do wonderful things, including education in remote areas, health systems, pregnant women, all sorts of health issues, but definitely for youth and older people. But we also had special opportunities for disabled people to be able to do wonderful things. And digital technology allows them to be just, you know, the disability disappears because it is the ability. And Cesarina wrote a blog for us on digital technology for disability, and it's really worth it. It's on our website and it's really worth it. Of course, we did our first parallel session for CSEAP, for our Asia Pacific Federation, and it was the Digital Democracy for Disasters. And what some really good things came out of that, we used, anyway, I'll talk about that shortly. Now, what are these little pie charts and things that I've got on the screen? 63% of people who attended were hybrid, and that includes we four who represented you. We found sometimes it was easier to stay home in our apartment and listen and participate in hybrid systems than get lost and have not very good technology inside the UN building. So I can understand why virtual is really important, but sometimes you don't get into the rooms. They're so packed full of people, as you can appreciate. Now, the other pie chart, the ones with in the middle, the bigger pie chart, it talks about the age groups of the people who attended. So that gives us a wonderful span as well. We had, which was wonderful to see so many young women or young people under age 39 or under 40. That was really quite an important thrust for the UN, to make sure that we're planting the seeds for the future, and the young people coming through have got, well, get to meet the older people for a start, but more than that, that the young people can have some power about and some hope about having control over their future, rather than the mental health pandemics we're having right now about feeling hopeless and helpless. And there's many reasons that contribute to that, not just COVID or lack of education. There's quite a few contributions to our pandemic, so-called pandemic there. But giving people a voice, young people a voice and some hope, really turn that around, and really does turn it around. And it also provides a bit of commitment for the future as well. Now, these bar charts here about what are you going to do after you've been to a CSW? I thought that was really important. And these statistics come out of the people who attended and who were part of the survey. And you may have been part of the survey as well. But I'm going to improve the work within my organisation was the highest outcome for people who attended and who participated. Lots of networking, how to be a better advocate, expanding your networks, which of course always happens when you've got wonderful people with something worthwhile to listen to and say. And some of them got really impassioned about pushing some chink in the armour in their own countries. When they see a chink in the armour, they say, oh, I've just got more ammunition that I'm going to be able to follow through. And Lou De Castro is a good person to know and work with in those areas, because she's such a go-getter when it comes to, oh goodness, let's capitalise on that. So, okay, and that's probably enough about that slide. So I'll just keep going. Well, I'll try to keep going. There we go. Now, this is our this special first parallel event that we had, but Soroptimists did six other events, and most of them were virtual, were online. So what did that mean? We were able to link in people from the other countries who weren't necessarily in New York, as well as, and Lee Elwood Brown was on a couple of those. Christine was on about 3. So we really supported each other and as Soroptimists, and we got a whole heap of other people attending these hybrid events. Really important. But our special face-to-face one was on a terrible time. It was like 4 o'clock in the morning for some people, and it was also in a building across the road that people wouldn't necessarily find. And sometimes the rooms was too small for the people coming in. But anyway, our special session was televised, and it's on, filmed, and it's loaded up onto our website as well. We did something a little bit strange, a little bit better, thanks to Judy Toll. Now, we've been using Slido and voting systems and audience participation in our board meetings, in a lot of our sessions lately, because it helps us to capture the ideas and the thoughts of the people around the table, not just the people presenting briefing papers or presenting data or case studies, or in our case, practical projects. So the projects we talked about, because our region has got has the highest incidence of natural disasters and the whole ambit of disasters, climate, COVID, criminal activity, conflict, all the seas, all the bad seas are in our area. By having our audience voting and participating in using Slido, we were able to understand what they were thinking and what their priorities were from the list that we were given. Plus, we had open-ended questions, and the open-ended questions allow us to go even further than what we had expected. Some of the really important things, of course, is the early warning systems. We gave the example of Indonesia. When Indonesia had an earthquake, the early warning systems did not work, but the government was adamant. They said, we sent texts to everyone. They'd forgotten that they hadn't accounted for the lack of infrastructure and the damaged infrastructure in getting the messages out to their people, and many people died. I can't remember right now how many thousand people were injured and died in that case. We also talked about the floods, the droughts, the bushfires, a whole range of other things. And using digital technology allows us, and Africa has invented, or Africa has a wonderful app already, but we couldn't really access the app to showcase it. But we want to build on what they have done in their app, and we want that to be part of this handbook for Soroptimists about how we help. And women are really good in when we break down the issues that we've got in disasters, women have some very strong strengths, and it's just because their natural ability to coordinate and look after kids and prioritise and those sorts of things. So women have got wonderful strengths that really should be used or appreciated and put and advanced and multiplied in recovery, even prevention and mitigation and adaptation in disasters. We talked about the 3-hour rule, the 3 days, the 3 weeks and 3 months. So the 3 hours are your early warning systems. 3 hours is your evacuation systems, and to be safe. Within 3 days, you really need to have good sanitation, good food, good logistics to be able to survive and stay together as families. And within 3 weeks, you've got to get kids back to school. You've got men have to be kept busy doing things, being very functional and useful. But within 3 weeks, we should have some assembly of less chaos and people getting on with their lives. Within 3 months, you really should be having them back to a settlement pattern and having some hope for the future, and to be back working, to be back going to school, have some normality. And if countries have not got people resettled and back to normality in 3 years, that is really a failure of governance. I'll just note, for those of you who weren't part of that, it might be interesting, but those who sat through our 2-hour, no, it wasn't, I think it was an hour and a half, digital democracy and the report coming out of that, it might be just a recap on that. What can we do about it? Well, there's 29 pages of resolutions. Australia's quite ahead in some of those areas. However, some of our countries in our federation, Australia's still got a lot to do, by the way, but some of our other countries are not necessarily there yet. I mean, of course, we're really keen about everyone, girls, boys, everyone having more science, maths, technology, and what's the other one? Engineering, and also arts. We also talk about STEAM as well, but now that we've got the word STEM education in the normal language, we aren't going to change that. So the thing is, we have to have the opportunities for everybody to get that sort of education, not necessarily limiting as it might have been in the past. Yes, we do have to embrace precautionary principles, but the thing is, we can use AI and data integrity and a whole range of other things to make life better using the digital technology that is emerging, or alternatively old technology that we just implement and implement in different ways. So we don't have to reinvent anything. There's plenty out there. And when you look across the countries and some of the case studies in some of the events that they had, yes, nothing's new under the sun. It's just the way it's applied. We talked about the events online for Soroptimists, and they were things like for the older person, which was really important. We had it on education. That was in the early days. Lee might have to help me here with some of the others. We had law, one about law, one definitely about domestic violence and violence, digital violence as well. The one that Cesarina did the blog for was really quite amazing, that we changed enhancing the quality of life for disabled people to become very, very abled people, and they always were. They just didn't have the technology to do so. Rural women's empowerment was really very special too. Sarada was involved with that special event, as well as Christine Johnson, I think, was the chair of that. We can probably ask a question of Sarada after about the rural women, because making sure those review topics are still in the consciousness and that we don't have a one-time dipping toe in the hot water. We really have to continue the good work that was done 4 years ago in that area. And I've already talked about our digital democracy, and that we've been asked to do a manual for SI, not only a position statement on it, but to do a manual so that all of our Soroptimists have a how-to and a go-to book, and Europe wants to work with us on that. So I think that's a wonderful step forward as a federation. Now, we've talked about the rural women and what scope that's there, but I might leave that to Cesarina Sarada to really fill in the gaps there. I was at another session, really important session. And before I go away, I wanted to talk about the positive things. And Lee Elwood-Brown would probably was at a couple of sessions with me. And some of it's changing the attitudes to the nastiness and the violence and the continuing bad behaviour that might happen in cyber and in the cyber world. And one of them is that when someone's behaviour is so bad and continues, they have a mental health problem. And if you've got a mental health problem, there are ways to address that are more constructive than just throwing you in jail with other criminals and not addressing the issue or perpetrator training. So we had a situation, and there's about 5 countries doing it this way now, that cyber stalking resulted in it was a male who was doing the stalking, although sometimes it's not only males, but anyway, in this case it was. And the police were involved, but the police handled it as if it was a mental health issue, which meant the man was given compulsory care, which means he goes into a mental health facility. And during that period that he's in there, it may be a month, it may be 6 weeks, and it may be more if there's no improvement. And in that time, he does perpetrator training, violence, anger management, a whole range of other underlying issues about mental health. Now, I felt that was a major constructive way forward to deal with domestic violence, but also with the violence on digital violence, because one of the most important messages out of this was that if you do it online, it's still a crime. It's as though you're doing it in person. Oh, have I spoken too long? No, there's a ping here. Okay. I should come up for air about now and say that the other really important thing that I did while I was away for 52 days, apart from meeting a lot of wonderful Soroptimists and looking at projects and doing marvellous things, was to represent Soroptimist International at UNESCAP, which is the United Nations Social and Economic Council for Asia Pacific. Now, they're 75 this year. Really important that we reviewed our progress on sustainable development. Well, there wasn't much progress, I'm afraid. The only SDG that went forward at all was digital infrastructure. Can you believe that? Yes, we can in our region, because we're pretty sharp technology people in Asia Pacific, and especially Southeast Asia Pacific, because as UNESCAP divides up its regions and geographical responsibilities and players, we have like about 8 different categories for Asia Pacific. Anyway, we reviewed these 5 SDGs. Water, and we're only really allowed to go to 1 lot of roundtables, but I was very fortunate to be able to go to 2, and that was infrastructure and cities. Well, that's my background, so I was quite comfortable. I've also done a lot of benchmarking over 22 years with these areas, so I was quite comfortable with those, and I felt that we really made headway on those. I was very fortunate to sit in on some of the water sessions, which were, odd ones, not the roundtables, and energy. And one of the most empowering thing was, pun there with energy, an empowering thing was this: we had a whole session which were 7 women who were talking about micro energy led by women. And it was quite amazing because usually UNESCAP gets whipped, and it got whipped in CSW about not having enough women's voices in their negotiations. So this whole panel was women from different countries doing really different things. And some of them were funding agencies led by women. I really wanted to write a paper just to capture the essence of what they were talking about. There's a recording as well, but I think some of the recording we'd have to interpret the sorts of things they're trying to say, but wonderful, wonderful. And then, of course, with partnerships, I had a different attitude to what partnerships was. What in this context for UNESCAP, the partnership was all about financing and joint initiatives, and one of the most wonderful one was the plastic pollution. 4 of our countries in the Mekong joined together. My team have heard all about this, me raving on about it. But what they did was community worked with business and governments and universities, and they work across the borders, and they share staff and they share people and share money. And 4 of these worst plastic polluting countries are working together. Now, what they've done in this very short time, even though they did the formal signing at UNESCAP, they'd already had some pilot projects together, was to change plastic pollution into resources in different sorts of ways. So what I saw just in that short time that they've been working together as 4 countries was just very reassuring and empowering, and it empowering for the most vulnerable people and the most polluted situations and the poorest people. So I saw, and it wasn't dirty work, and I thought it would have been, but I was quite empowered by that. Okay, I'll just, these are the sorts of topics we dealt with in our cities roundtable. Nothing new there, but that's SDG 11, which South Queensland and South East Queensland, we're tackling housing as a major 10-year project, and that dovetails into a 10-year program which leads us into the Olympics and the funding, and that's what I've been talking about at the University of Sunshine Coast today. But so I'm full of it, so I better be quiet. It'll dominate my discussion, and I don't want it to. And then I really have to acknowledge all the wonderful Soroptimists I met on my adventures. This is the last slide, if you're interested, Fiona, because I'm concerned about time and I'm putting people to sleep. But the lovely women in the Gothenburg up the top left-hand side, they are like the governors and the governors of the union. They've got very different bureaucratic structures inside Soroptimist. Ingrid, that one in the front with the white shirt and the blue jacket, blue little waistcoat, she's a policewoman, and she is wonderful. The other lady sitting behind me, she was a brand new president for Gothenburg, which was really great. And of course, Chris's friend is on the left-hand side in the middle there. She, wonderful woman who really looked after me and made special efforts to cover a lot of territory and talk about a lot of things while I was only in Sweden for a few days. It was lovely. In the middle, we've got the new program director for Canada, and she lives at North Vancouver. That's the blonde lady in the middle there, and she saved my bacon when it comes to laptops. Up in the top there, we've got the wonderful women from JB. The lady in the front is in her 80s. She is an obstetrician, and the one behind me is a dentist, I believe, and really different backgrounds, really. And some of the projects they had were just marvelous. So I'm learning how to eat with my fingers on banana leaves. That was really quite an education. And underneath that is our Singapore. 3 of our Singapore clubs and women joined together that night. And Aisha, the lady in black on the left-hand side there, she had come down from KL Bangsa, I think, and she had come down to join us in Singapore at that time. Now, the right down at the bottom where everyone's wearing their veils, I didn't wear my veil. I've just got bright orange hair. Still the 16 days of orange, the world was still happening while I was in Malaysia. It's faded a little bit now, thank goodness. This was the wonderful shelter that we had for girls waiting to have their cases heard for modern slavery. So their cases, they have to be cared for, and they have to, as in the shelter, until their cases are heard through the courts, and it may take 4 months. Now, this really pulled at my heartstrings because the next day they were getting 65 new ones coming in. And I just thought it was very special for all these volunteers to be running most amazing things. And those pictures on the back wall there are all the ones that the girls who were living there or sheltering there at the time until their cases are heard, they were doing really wonderful things, which they may have not have been had the opportunity to do their whole lives. Those elegant mob of women on the bottom right-hand side were the power team, we called ourselves. Yeah, right. We have Su Yong in the middle, and of course beside me is Joanne Yeo and Norraini. This is Helen Chi, she's our finance person, and that lovely lady on the far end, was she an ambassador for Hong Kong? But anyway, she's now back in Malaysia. The Swedish lady with the tall blonde woman is the FPA, the Population Foundation ambassador for several countries, and she's very approachable, and her business card is very interesting because on the back it interprets what the work she's supposed to do. Of course, Sarada's looking absolutely gorgeous and elegant, which is very easy for Sarada. And we have Leanne, no, that's Agnes Chan beside her there, who we all probably know from our work. And the new president for SIROM, I think, is the young woman with the red shirt on. So that's only a little snapshot of the wonderful women I met, and they're all Soroptimists doing the most amazing and diverse work. And it just, we can read the reports being in program and we can have an appreciation, but until you go there and you're part of it and you meet these wonderful people who just, and we even got a STEM group working while I was there, which was really quite wonderful. So they make everything worthwhile, and it just brought to life a lot of the stuff that we do. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you, and are there any questions?
Awesome, thank you so much for that, Donnell. So we've got a couple of comments, and as you were going through there, you did mention Sarada potentially having giving us a bit of an update on the Rural Women's event that she hosted at CSW. So Sarada, if you are willing, able, did you potentially want to give us a bit of an insight from your side of things on that event?
Actually, Donnell seems to have thrown me into the deep end. I wasn't prepared for this. But okay, I know that we had a session which was organized by Women for Water President Marie, our previous SI president, and also Lee was on that webinar, and we had Joanne Yeo and me present a case study, which was really interesting, because we did a workshop on disaster risk reduction for rural women in Sarawak. And we had previously helped this community, which is situated very deep in the interior, very near to the Indonesian border in Kalimantan. So we had helped them set up a clean water system, rainwater harvesting, and then send them for training in farming, etc. But some devastating floods really destroyed their crops and their farm and everything that they had benefited from for the past 3 years. So they don't have any internet in the interiors. So we had to bring the team down, women, 12 women, 3 men, down to the nearest town, which is like 8 hours away. So there was quite an arduous journey on a 4-wheel drive vehicle through really bumpy logging tracks and so on. And we ran a 2-day workshop for them. And this is one of those things that was really, Donnell spoke about partnerships. And we had Heineken Malaysia come in to support us on this. So they really funded the workshop. They provided the funds to transport the women. They gave us funds to rebuild the farm and to re-educate them. We brought engineers, women, all of them, from Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, to train them on what to do before, during, and after floods, so that they would be better prepared. And we had to devise very simple early warning systems because they don't have the internet. And some of them, their mobile phones, they don't have cellular data. They just depend on Wi-Fi, which was not available during floods. So they came up with suggestions like ringing church bells or using runners on motorbikes to go from one village to another to warn them of impending floods and making sure they gathered in a safe place. And then we had advice on what to pack on a ready-to-take-away bag with their immediate belongings and some essentials to survive. Donnell mentioned 3 days and 3 weeks. And yes, they sometimes need to stay in the relief center for about more than 3 days, often for a week or 2. So those were some of the things we worked on until Judy came up with Judy Toll. She brought up some very interesting apps that we could use during disasters. And I don't have that with me, but Donnell, if you remember, we were supposed to develop that, and that was part of the education that we were supposed to provide to people in remote areas and so on to help them kickstart and sort of market their produce again using digital apps. So if they don't have connectivity and so on, which they normally do, except during major disasters. So those were some of the things we did, Fiona. Thank you for that question.
Amazing, thank you. I do a bit of work with, well, I work within local government, and we had our awards ceremony last week, and one of the finalist projects was an infrastructure that was set up at Carpentaria Shire Council, which is in that Normanton, middle of North Queensland. And they've used AI and remote video infrastructure to map and track the conditions of the road network. And so I feel like there's a lot that we are doing here in Australia as well, because obviously our remote and rural communities are affected by floods quite often too. So that was quite a significant improvement in efficiency for that region, and I'm wondering whether some of those lessons might be transferable to some of the other work that's being done in different areas too, because yeah, there's the integration of technology inside of the disaster relief, and then technology in other areas is a really important segue that you mentioned, Donnell. And yeah, it's when it has the ability to be an early warning system, as well as help people to better prepare. That's the thing, isn't it? So one of the other questions that came through, Donnell, you mentioned the SI handbook. Can you say a little bit more about that? What that's all about, what we can expect from that, and whether you have any indicative timeframes of when we can expect to receive a first draft or copy of the handbook?
Yes. Not yet. before we go to Dublin, which is middle of July, we expect to have first draft, because we want it to our 5 federations to own it, or to be able to use it. So it's fairly important that I use very simple language, which will be English, but very simple, lots of images, the outcomes from our Slido, which again Judy Toll came to the rescue there, and the priorities that were voted on while we were there. So really important that we use the strengths that the women have, and that we appreciate what we're very good at, and put that to work, so that we are not afraid. We're on the front foot when some nasty thing happens to us in our life. We're on the front foot, and we get our kids and our ducks in a row, and probably our ducks and our pets as well, but definitely get ourselves organised, so that we're, instead of fear and that sort of thing, we've all done. Now in Australia, we've been able to have, when fire, we had all those fire, what to do in a fire, do you stay and defend, or do you evacuate and have yourself, and all the kids have a job. Everybody in the family has a job to get yourself evacuated. If we use digital technology for that, we at least know which bloody evacuation centre we're supposed to be going to. That's always a good thing, not heading into the fire, but the opposite. We had that for fires. We always have it for cyclones. Even Yasi, when 75% of Queensland was underwater with Yasi, we had 4 babies born and nobody died. Now, how fantastic was that? We had a standing ovation in UN when that happened. So, good on us. Instead of every disaster's got another 1,000, another 54 people got drowned, another, so many. I shouldn't say that, because that Melbourne had another earthquake yesterday of 3.8, and has some impacts resulting from that. So, always close to home, always, and disasters generally, you can't really escape an earthquake except get into a safe toilet or a doorway, or hide under a school desk. But when it comes to disasters, very, very similar situations, very similar protocols happen, and that's what the handbook was supposed to be good for. We do have ones written by men, but I don't think they're good enough, and that's come up in our UNDRR when we did the stakeholder analysis, and it's halfway through the Sendai framework, and women and disabled people are rewriting that framework, because they're the ones most impacted, and we are the most impacted. So that's why why we decided that it was a really good thing to have that handbook. So a first draft will be before we go to Ireland in the middle of July. Long sentence, long story, long.
No,
answer,
lovely.
sorry.
Brilliant. Lots of context. No, it's great. Thank you, Donnell. Bettina's just added in the comments as well that she's currently working on a flood recovery project, collecting stories and working on the mobilisation of volunteers within neighbourhoods. So plenty happening in that space. Do we have any other questions from anyone that wants to unmute and ask Donnell directly?
Yeah, Chris Knight's got a hand up.
Yep.
Probably just a couple of comments more than anything, Donnell. Fabulous way to spend 52 days. And I know it was incredibly exhausting, covering, north, south, west, and everywhere else around the globe.
Energizing.
The whole thing is, as Saren has said too, these are real Soroptimists on the ground, grassroots level, working so hard to help local women. And that is something that makes me really proud about being a Soroptimist. And I know our club have reached out to the Cobargo and Lismore communities during those natural disasters there, and have done some great work. But there was a couple of things I wanted to raise with you that you'll find of great interest too when we're looking at digital technology and artificial intelligence and stuff like that. Last week, the PNG Parliament, I've got to get this right, Permanent Parliamentary Committee on gender-based violence and gender equality and women's empowerment, did a live stream. And our Soroptimist members up in PNG had met with their local MPs before that. And I've never heard such powerful discussions and comments coming out of the mouths of men in regard to the atrocities that is happening up there for women and children in particular. And, you know, I watched the second day live stream, and I'm on Messenger with Kylie Ann and Jane and Nellie and Kimberly. And, you know, they were able to see parts of it, but technology and even just not being able to have electricity kept dropping in and out for them. But it was streamed live. So that in itself was a really powerful use of technology for people to hear, not just in PNG, what's going on up there around gender equality for women, but live. And, you know, they really were grilling the treasurer around the allocations of funding and stuff like that. But the other exciting thing with SIMNI is that we're partnering with Women's Network Australia, and CEO Cheryl Gray is joining SIMNI Club. But she has negotiated with the Queensland government free online digital technology, which we're working with our own club members and other women around Queensland and Australia to be able to access that. And that leads into, and hopefully Fiona might even just mention this as we have opportunities to do, but it links in really well with her mentoring and leadership program around empowering women to have the tools and knowledge and access and all of that that's available. So these online courses, there's over 26,000 that people can choose from. They are some very short ones, and it might just be a little basic component on how to use an element of Excel, or it's a bigger one on cybersecurity. And there were some very interesting things in that about keeping yourself safe online. And that would be the one that I would absolutely encourage everybody to do. But Cheryl's also been able to access 6 laptops through talking to different friends that will be gifted to different women's organisations so that they also have a tool that they can use to access this online training. But Fee, you might like to just mention your leadership mentoring program while we're here. Nudge, nudge.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you. But well done, Donnell. We're very proud of you.
Yeah, it is so
Thank you.
good. And yeah, it's seeing the photos of all the women, just incredible. And thank you so much for personalizing it and connecting us to those women. I really appreciate that touch. It was lovely. So one of the things, so the theme for International Women's Day event this year was, and I guess for my presidency, is this idea of leading her ship, that we are the leaders of our own lives first. And part of the, I guess, idea of taking that past the International Women's Day event and having something a bit more lasting was to launch a pilot program of mentoring. So to reach out to members of the SIMNI Club and invite them to be a mentor, or indeed to be a mentee, potentially both, as you know, that relationship of mentoring is very much a two-way street. And whilst there may be one person who's slightly more experienced and one that's slightly less experienced, the purpose of any more mentoring partnership is for both people to become better versions of themselves as a consequence of those that partnership in mentoring. So we're at the stage where we're very close to heading back out to our network of people, predominantly obviously our club members initially, but there's no reason why there's not a broader network can't be involved. Donnell's putting her hand up. Are you volunteering to mentor and be? Yeah, no, you got something to say?
Not this week. No, not this week.
So obviously with a program like this, the key is being able to identify who wants to be part of the program, and then matching people up together. So if
it's a mentor label, people feel that one's superior to the other. If we have a buddy label or sisters label, it's a sharing, it's equal. And I've found that with in my roles in the past, having that equal relationship that everybody contributes something, like even the youngest person who might be a tech whiz, buddies up or friends. Well, because we're females, I reckon sisters is pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and
one of my I guess keys there as well is reframing the whole conversation around the word mentoring, and that it's not superior or inferior, and breaking
don't
that
use
down.
it. Don't use it. It's
Too
an
late.
insult. Okay, it's in the profession. In the professions, it's actually insulting when you're doing professional development in professional bodies, and we really needed to. Anyway, that's another story. I wanted to ask Chris, are we only dealing with Queensland government with these online free training? Can we roll it out further?
We have capacity to do that, and Cheryl and I are working on it. But just to touch base with that mentoring thing, the SI Europe have got mentoring programs in place over there that are very successful, that have actually led to younger women joining clubs with their leadership academy. And Fiona's approach with her overall rollout of the Lead Her Ship program is a very soft approach in regard to the mentoring, and that emphasis around there is a wheel that people can select particular areas and identify where they would like some support. And it's the matching up of people there. So it's not about, I know everything and I'll tell you what you need to know. I mean, the greatest misconceptions with mentoring is that you're not there to tell the mentee, you know, how they need to do things. You're there to be their support buddy, as you say, best sister. And that's really the focus that Fiona's got with this. So, you know, we'll pilot the first phase of this, and working with Cheryl and WNA gives us a greater access to women in professions and business. And Cheryl, with her linking with this digital online training, is providing women, if they're not already a member of WNA, that they can come in under a student and affiliate membership, so that they'll be able to have the benefits of being able to tap into the Soroptimists membership and also into the WNA network, which is national and going global. So it's a beautiful harmonization and partnership of SIMNI members being able to do some really practical skills. And the key is, you know, the contract was for X number of licenses, and we're working hard to get that number up there. And then once people sign up for it, it's up to them to what they choose to access as far as the online training goes. So that can be a complementary part of Fiona's Lead Her Ship mentoring program. But it is all about, you know, you're in charge of the flotilla here. You know, you get your boats and we're all heading in the same direction, but we can get off at different ports and do different things. And, you know, our club is amazing, you know, because we've got the diversity and inclusion and age difference too, so that there's a lot of opportunity for people to learn lots of different skills. And, you know, we've got a lot of members in our club that have also been to UN meetings as well. So, you know the value of being able to have that global voice. We've also got a really exciting project kicking off in Papua New Guinea with Kylie Ann up in the Murat province. And, you know, so I think it's just another wonderful way of women reaching out to each other. And it is that best sister. But, you know, mentoring, I like the fact, as Fiona said, it's challenging other people's concepts of it. And the Europeans and their mentoring program is working really, really well. And I'm quite excited to catch up with some of the members in Dublin to find out a little bit more about that. But anyway, yeah, it's all good.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you, Donnell. Really appreciate that. Okay, so do we have Kathy's got a comment there for you, Donnell, as well. I don't know whether you can read the chat. She just said, you know, thank you and for sharing your trip, and you're amazing, and so are all the women. So she's headed off for the night.
I left out so much. I mean, the work in Malaysia and the projects were just brilliant, and I only had a few photos. I'm sorry, Sarada, I should have had a lot more, but otherwise we'd be here all night.
Absolutely. Are there any
And-
final questions or comments before we wrap up the conversation tonight?
Only from me, Donnell, and I understood 3/4 of that, so thank you.
That's
Awesome.
good. I'm happy with that. This is progress.
Brilliant, very good. Well, thank you, Donnell. I really appreciate that. Oh, and Lee, you've put your hand up. Did you want to say something?
I know, I'm just clapping, Marnie.
Bravo, bravo, indeed.
Thank you. Well done, Marnie.
Wait till Marnie gets back after Dublin.
Oh God, yeah.
Oh.
She'll
Take
be
it to another
firing on
level.
all 4 cylinders.
Good. Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. Well, look, thank you. Every one of you on the tonight have influenced the sorts of things I do in Soroptimists. So thank you for all of your advice over the last year or couple of years. It really does shape the sorts of things that I'm able to discuss with our other Soroptimists. And so I do listen. I do listen a lot. Sometimes I can't do everything with it, but I do listen. Thank you.
Beautiful. Awesome. Bravo. Thank you so much, Donnell. And thank you to everyone for attending. And keep an eye out for the mentoring stuff. If you are interested, please reach out and let us know that you want to be part of it. Yeah, we'll see you all again, not in the not too distant future, no doubt. Thank you so much for being part of today.
Thank you for your patience.